Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander down a cobbled path through misty villages, creaky kitchens, and smoky hearths to uncover the slightly crusty but surprisingly rich world of medieval snacks. We're talking bread so dense it could be mistaken for a roofing tile cheese that was technically still alive, and beverages that might legally count as soup. So, before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where and when you're listening from. Are you in bed in Belgium or curled up in California? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's a chilly late afternoon in a medieval village, just the kind of time when your stomach makes that first lazy grumble. You're not starving, just peckish. There's no vending machine in sight, no crinkly snack wrapper to reach for. So what do? You wander toward the communal oven. The smell hits you first, not sweet, not exactly appetizing, but undeniably bready. In front of you, round dark loaves are stacked like bricks, because in some cases they are used like bricks. This is coarse rye bread, often called trencher bread. And no, it's not sliced for a sandwich. It's meant to be your plate. You put food on it, you maybe gnaw on the edges later, or you give it to the dog if it's too hard. Sometimes, if you're feeling particularly generous, it's thrown to the poor or crumbled into soup. And that's snack number one, old bread. Now let's talk about why it tastes like a fermented hay bale. Medieval flour isn't sifted, so you're getting everything bran, bits of husk, and occasionally a pebble. Yes, a tiny pebble. Dentistry was not prepared for that level of crunch. But hey, it's filling. Sort of. If you're lucky, there's honey in your house, thick, golden, and clinging to the inside of a clay pot like it doesn't want to be eaten. Spread some of that onto your trencher, and you've got a treat. Maybe the only sweet thing you'll taste this week. Honey was a big deal. It wasn't just food, it was medicine, a preservative, even an offering to saints. Sticky, sacred, and shockingly expensive. Let's pause to enjoy this humble moment. You a slab of rugged bread, a smear of honey, and maybe the village cat eyeing your hand like it wants a bite. Don't give in. That cat has its own secrets. You stroll through the village, chewing quietly. The ground is muddy from last night's rain, and you're trying to avoid stepping on anything squishy. There's a baker's apprentice nearby hauling a cart of burnt loaves. Why? Because some customers prefer them that way. Charred bread lasts longer. It's like the medieval version of extra toasted toast. But don't get too excited. Crunchy here often translates to inedible. Now let's dig into something more unusual. Down the lane, you find a merchant selling tiny dried wafers. These aren't cookies. They're more like pressed dough circles baked in iron molds, often with religious images. These oblaten snacks are technically food, but mostly symbolic. Sometimes people nibble on them when fasting, just enough to feel not guilty. It's like a divine cheat day. And here's where our first strange fact pops, since some medieval folks believed eating too much bread made you slow-witted, like mentally sluggish. So naturally, scholars and monks would carefully monitor their loaf intake before writing anything important. On the other hand, peasants couldn't afford to be choosy. Bread was survival. You didn't just eat it, you stored it, hardened it, soaked it, reused it, and occasionally wrote home about it, assuming you were literate and had bread to spare. Now you might ask, was all medieval bread like this? Excellent debate. There's actually a huge variety based on class and region. In the south of France, for instance, olive oil and spices could sneak into dough. In Islamic Spain, bread could be sweetened and perfumed with rose water. Rich folks had access to white bread, sifted like snow, soft and fluffy like modern brioche. But the lower down the social ladder you go, the darker and rougher your loaf becomes, like a medieval metaphor baked into dinner. At this point, your imaginary snack break is about halfway done. Your teeth are still recovering from the trencher's assault, and that honey has you thinking, was sugar even a thing? Spoiler, not really. Not yet. It's a rare luxury from the East still whispered about like gossip. For now, you chew your way back home, grateful for every crumb, even if it takes more effort to bite than it did to bake. And remember, next time someone complains their toast is burnt, just smile sweetly and say, at least it's not 13th century snack bread. Joke count 3. We're right on schedule. You're still chewing, you poor thing. That bread really hangs around, doesn't it? It's not exactly light fare, and certainly not the kind of thing you want stuck behind your molars before bed. But never fear, tonight we've got something to wash it down with. Something medieval. Let's talk drinks. You're standing by a low wooden table now and someone hands you a clay cup. It's warm to the touch and smells, how to put this gently, like someone tried to brew tea in a barn. This, dear listener, is ale, not the bubbly kind you'd find in a pub today, but the kind that tastes faintly of wet grain and ambition. It's flat, murky, and sometimes slightly sour, but it does the job. It's breakfast, lunch, and dinner in liquid form. And yes, even the kids drank it. Why? Because in many places, water wasn't safe. It might come from a pond where someone just washed their boots. So fermented drinks like ale, low in alcohol, high in questionable flavor, were a safer bet. Now don't picture medieval folks stumbling around drunk at all hours. This ale, called small beer, had just enough alcohol to kill bacteria, but not enough to get you tipsy unless you chugged several pints. Which some people did. Let's not pretend they were saints. But if ale's not your thing, maybe you fancy a glass of almond milk. Yes, almond milk, in the Middle Ages. Long before hip cafes were charging $6 a latte, monks and cooks were soaking almonds, grinding them, and squeezing out a creamy, nutty drink. It wasn't dairy, so it could be consumed on fasting days, and it had a lovely richness, especially if you could sweeten it with a dab of honey or a rare pinch of sugar. It was a luxury item, to be fair. Almonds weren't exactly growing on every tree in England. But in the kitchens of noble households and monasteries, almond milk was a staple, and sometimes used to cook rice dishes, soups, or even sweet custards. Now here's your quirky detail for the night. Medieval almond milk was so common in upper-class recipes that some households kept a specific servant whose entire job was grinding nuts. Imagine explaining that job at a dinner party. I'm the nut masher of House Bosham. A noble role, truly. As you sip your warm ale or your even warmer almond milk, you're surrounded by the quiet clinking of cups and low conversation. The air smells faintly of smoke, yeast, and old wood. Somewhere someone sneezes, which is followed immediately by a murmur of, "God bless you," not because of superstition, but because sneezing was considered a sign of internal sin escaping the body. Or maybe it was just dusty. Let's drift a little further now out of the kitchen and toward the village green. There's a small festival today, nothing fancy. Just locals gathered with a few barrels and some baked goods. Among the snacks being passed around are curious little pastries, thin wafers rolled like scrolls and dusted with spices. And if you're very lucky, someone might hand you a hot spice posset, a drink made by curdling milk with wine or ale, then stirring in honey and sometimes egg yolks. It sounds terrible, doesn't it? Like something that happens by accident in your fridge. But somehow it's delicious, creamy, tangy, slightly sweet. Think of it as the medieval smoothie, if you will, or more accurately, medieval bedtime tea, with a kick. And speaking of kicks, here's your academic head scratcher for tonight. Some historians argue that medieval ale wasn't all that alcoholic because yeast strains were weak fermentation, inconsistent, and brewers cautious. Others claim that people built up a tolerance and simply drank a lot. So were they buzzed all the time? Or just hydrating cleverly, jury's still out. You wander past a row of smiling faces, everyone sipping or nibbling, wrapped in wool cloaks and laughter. A child runs by with something sticky in hand, a roasted apple caramelized over an open flame, split down the middle and stuffed with nuts. No candy bars, no potato chips, but definitely snacks. Let's pause here for a moment and let the sounds fade. You're holding a cup of ale in one hand and a warm little fruit parcel in the other. It's not fancy, it's not flashy, but it's just enough. A snack, after all, doesn't have to impress, it only has to comfort. And now your 3 light jokes before bed. If you ever complain about oat milk again, remember someone once paid taxes with almond milk. Medieval ale may have been weak, but it was still stronger than most of their dental care. That posset you just drank, congratulations. You've basically sipped hot cheese punch. You've got a warm belly now. That grainy bread, the nutty milk, and perhaps a bit more ale than strictly necessary for a leisurely stroll have left you pleasantly full, if a little sluggish. But don't get too cozy just yet. We're about to meet one of the medieval world's most opinionated snacks, cheese. Tonight, you're walking past a farmhouse, the kind with smoke curling lazily from the thatched roof and chickens milling about like they own the place. Inside, it smells of straw, sour milk, and something that might once have been a sock. Congratulations, you've entered cheese country. Modern cheese comes in neat plastic packaging or wax wrappings adorned with cheerful logos. Medieval cheese. It was more of a living creature than a packaged food. You spot a wheel of it sitting on the table. It's not smooth, it's cracked, slightly oozing. And if you look closely, is it moving? That's not a trick of the light. That's protein with personality. Some varieties, especially those made in the countryside, were left to age naturally. And nature, as it turns out, adores cheese. So yes, it was entirely normal for medieval cheese to host a few uninvited guests. This brings us to a particularly colorful term, maggot cheese. Some medieval folk, not all thankfully, believed that cheese crawling with live larvae was especially flavorful. It was soft, it was spreadable, and yes, it tingled. Picture trying to sell that on a charcuterie board today. But let's not be too dramatic. Most people preferred their cheese firms salty, and most importantly still. In fact, cheese was a daily snack, especially for travelers. Wrapped in cloth or waxed leaves, it could endure long journeys without refrigeration. Paired with onions, dried fruit, or just more bread, it was the medieval version of a protein bar, portable, nutritious, and occasionally terrifying. You bite into a chunk. It's sharp, slightly sour, and full of tiny crystals. That's a good sign. It means it's aged properly. Or maybe it's just old. It's hard to tell sometimes. Nearby, someone is stirring a pot over the fire. It's fresh cheese in the making curds floating in warm whey, soon to be strained and salted. This kind of cheese is soft, delicate, and meant to be eaten quickly before it has time to develop an attitude. Here's your quirky fact of the evening: monasteries were the top cheesemakers of the time. Monks and nuns kept cows, goats, even sheep, and treated cheesemaking as an act of divine patience. Some recipes took weeks or months to perfect. Others required just a morning and a clean cloth. Their cellars, cool, damp, and dim, were ideal environments for nurturing wheels of pungent bliss. You take another bite, then glance around. Is it your imagination, or does the room smell even stronger than it did a minute ago? Don't panic. That's just medieval refrigeration, otherwise known as a dark corner and a little bit of luck. Now for a surprising twist, not all cheese was made for eating. That's right, some cheese was used as rent payment. A sturdy wheel could cover part of your taxes. A particularly fine one might appease a landowner or serve as a bribe for a guard. Cheese had real economic value. And occasionally, it had opinions. There's a tale part, folklore part, delicious gossip about a wheel of cheese that rolled off a monastery shelf and down a steep hill, crashing spectacularly into a bishop's carriage. The bishop, interpreting it as divine punishment, vowed never to eat cheese again. No one ever told him it was just poor shelf construction. So what kind of cheese you ate said something about you. Soft, fresh cheese. You were likely humble, rural, maybe even a bit pious. Aged, hard cheese that suggested connections, access, perhaps even status. And foreign cheese, say something from France or Italy, that was luxury, something to bring out for guests or hide from tax collectors. Let's take a brief academic detour. There's mild disagreement among historians about the status of cheese in medieval life. Some argue it was a low food, common, cheap, and forgettable. Others point to banquet records and noble accounts where cheese appeared among the delicacies served. So which is it, peasant food or noble fare? The answer, as with so many things in history, is yes, both. As you make your way back to the hearth, you notice a young boy carrying a small wooden box. He opens it carefully to reveal a soft, pale mound, wrapped in herbs and tied with a bit of twine. He offers it to you with pride. His family only makes 3 like it each winter. You take a bite and it tastes of garlic, thyme, and a hint of something you can't name, something ancestral maybe. This is no ordinary snack. This is heritage. This is pride. This is survival wrapped in cheesecloth. Now let's end with your 3 lighthearted cheese-flavored jokes for the evening. Medieval cheese, because sometimes your snack should fight back. Nothing says romance like gifting your crush a wheel of aged goat cheese. If your cheese has a name and moves on its own, maybe let it go. As the fire crackles and the night deepens, the last bite lingers on your tongue, salty, mysterious, and oddly comforting. You close your eyes, the scent of aged dairy and harsh smoke settling around you like a wool blanket. It's not glamorous, it's not sanitized, but it's real. And as you drift off to sleep, just remember, if you ever doubt the power of cheese, there was a time it could pay your rent, impress your neighbors, or chase a bishop downhill. By now you've had your bread, your drink, and your cheese. Congratulations. You're officially snack certified for the 13th century, but let's not stop there. Tonight you're about to chew your way into one of the most underrated dangers of the medieval world: snacks that could break your teeth. Yes, friend, imagine biting into something so dry, so dense, so determinedly unyielding that your molars reconsider their entire career path. Welcome to the world of hardtack. You find yourself in a small riverside camp. Merchant soldiers and a few stray cats lounge by scattered fires, chewing, or rather attempting to chew on square pale bricks that look more like construction material than food. Technically, they're biscuits, made from flour, water, and salt, baked once, then baked again, then left to dry until they become eternal. And that was the whole idea. Hardtack, also known as ship biscuit or sea bread, wasn't made for enjoyment. It was made for endurance, for shelf life, for surviving months, even years. Archaeologists have found specimens that could still break a jaw today, and they have the dental records to prove it. To eat one, you don't just bite. Oh no, you soak in soup or ale, or if you're especially fortunate, hot fat, anything to soften it up. Otherwise, you'll chip a tooth faster than you can say, "This was a mistake." This made hardtack ideal for travel, long campaigns, sea voyages, or any situation where moldy bread just won't do. And if it got a little buggy, no problem. Those tiny wriggling residents were considered bonus protein. Honestly, most people just tapped the biscuit on a rock to shake the weevils out and moved on. No harm done, no extra charge. As you sit by the fire, gently nibbling one iron-like corner of your snack, a knight seated nearby offers advice. Let it soak in broth for an hour, then chew slow. You nod, trying not to reveal that you may have just dislocated your jaw. Here's a quirky twist. Hardtack was often stamped, not with logos or brand slogans, but with royal insignias or monastic seals. These marks told you who baked it or under which lord's authority it was produced. It was food, but also paperwork. Now, across the river, a group of hunters passes around something quite different: strips of dried, salted, and smoked meat. Medieval jerky, but not beef usually. Think rabbit boar or pigeon strung up in rafters for weeks until tough enough to outlast a sword fight. It's chewy, it's leathery, it's surprisingly flavorful, especially compared to the concrete biscuit you just wrestled into submission. And suddenly, soup starts making a lot more sense. Not just for warmth, not just for nutrition, but as a tool, a culinary solvent to rehydrate stale bread, soften dried meat, and render the inedible somewhat edible. Back at the fire, a traveling merchant unrolls a cloth bundle filled with dried fruits and seeds, figs, dates, maybe even roasted chestnuts. Now this feels like a treat. Sweet, portable, and preserved with care. Dried fruit was snack and status all in one. Even kings craved raisins. Which brings us to tonight's weird little fact: some medieval travelers carried dried peas in their pockets to snack on during the road. Crunchy, dusty, awkward, but oddly satisfying. Like trail mix if the trail had no chocolate and the mix was just peas. You stretch out near the fire boots, off jaw sore, belly full. Around you, the soft sounds of chewing echo in the dark, crackling, crunching, tearing. The medieval world may have lacked packaging, but not snacks. The camp feels like one big crunchy ASMR loop. Now for tonight's scholarly squabble, some historians claim hardtack shouldn't count as a snack by modern standards. Too hard, too utilitarian, not enjoyed. Others argue it was made in large batches to eat between meals, which sounds pretty snacky. So is it a snack or a survival ration? You rub your jaw and decide that if it makes noise when dropped, maybe it's both. And now your three lighthearted, tooth-shattering jokes before bed. Hardtack, the only snack that comes with its own dental insurance. If you hear a crunch before you bite, don't worry, it's probably still good. Medieval jerky, because nothing says love like meat that could double as shoe leather. You lie back on a scratchy wool blanket stomach, oddly satisfied the last crumb of biscuit, still working its way into submission. Somewhere nearby, someone curses softly as their hardtack cracks in half, and not at the weak spot. And as the fire dies down and the night settles in, you think to yourself, in a world without snacks in shiny wrappers or bags of chips, it turns out survival, the curious case of medieval mystery pies. You wake up the next morning, figuratively of course, with the distinct sense that your jaw has been through a bit of a workout. That hard bread really left its mark. But don't worry, tonight's treat will be a little softer, a little flakier, and a whole lot more mysterious. You find yourself wandering into a bustling medieval market square. The air buzzes with the sounds of merchants bartering chickens, weaving through the crowd, and the gentle clatter of pots and pans. Colorful fabrics sway in the breeze, and from one corner, a delicious aroma curls your way. Something warm, savory, and inviting. Welcome to the world of medieval pies. But don't picture the golden, perfectly crimped pastries from your favorite bakery window. These are rustic, hearty. Their crusts are thick pinch closed with practiced hands designed more for practicality than presentation. They're the kind of pies that fill bellies and fuel long workdays. You join a short line behind a man in a woolen cloak and a woman gently cradling a basket of herbs. The pie vendor works quickly, scooping a hot filling from a small pot and folding it into a pastry shell with a satisfying press. You can't see what's inside, but that's half the fun. Medieval pies didn't always come with labels. Some were filled with fish, often salted and shredded into fine flakes. Others used root vegetables, spiced lentils, or tender meats, slow-cooked over coals. There were even pies for special occasions that featured fruit herbs and a touch of honey, all wrapped in a comforting shell of baked dough. You take a bite. It's warm, savory, and full of flavor. Hints of thyme and parsley, maybe onion, something a little smoky. Whatever it is, it works. The crust is firm and a bit chewy, but still satisfying. In wealthier households, the pie crust called a coffin due to its shape was designed to hold the filling, but not necessarily be eaten. But for most folks, nothing went to waste. Every crumb was precious. Some pies, especially during festivals, were sweet, filled with dried fruits, like apples, pears, or prunes, sweetened with honey, or the occasional pinch of rare imported sugar. These treats were beloved and often brought out for special guests or celebrations. And here's your curious fact for the evening. In rare cases at elaborate feasts, a pie might contain a little surprise, not in the form of ingredients, but as a playful performance. There are stories of pies being served that when cut open, revealed small birds or trinkets as part of a banquet display. These were more theatrical than edible, and they definitely sparked conversation around the table. Back in the market square, bakers call out over one another, each offering their own signature pie. One advertises a pilgrim's pie made with lentils and herbs. Another offers a night's delight filled with roasted root vegetables and fragrant broth. Each is crafted from whatever was available that morning, a blend of creativity and necessity. You try another, savoring the flaky pastry and the flavorful mix inside. It's a little tangy, a little sweet, and very comforting. It might be turnips and a splash of wine, or maybe a well-spiced mash of grains and greens. Either way, it's satisfying in that way only food made with care can be. This leads us to an age-old question: were these pies a clever way to stretch ingredients or a practical way to serve meals on the go? Historians debate both sides. Some argue they were used to repurpose leftovers into a nourishing form, while others believe they were just a delicious and efficient part of daily life. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. You lean against a stone wall pie, in hand letting the sounds of the market fade into the background. The smells swirl around you: roasted onions, baked bread, worn leather damp earth, and a hint of something sweet from a nearby vendor selling spiced nuts. You take one more bite and it's warm all the way through. Tonight your meal isn't grand or gourmet, but it's nourishing, wrapped in history, and just a bit surprising. You've survived mystery pies, hard cheese, and harder bread. Your taste buds have been brave, your jaw heroic. But tonight's story is about something that sounds innocent enough, sweet even, cozy, comforting. We're talking about sugar. Well, not quite, not the way we know it, because for most of the medieval world, sugar was less everyday pantry staple and more rare exotic miracle. You didn't sprinkle it casually. You whispered about it like gossip. You guarded it like treasure. Tonight, you're standing in the back room of a wealthy household's kitchen, not the dining hall. No, this is deeper and past the roasting spits and the flour sacks. There on a high shelf, locked in a little wooden box, is something white. Not salt, sugar. It's coarse, clumpy, slightly yellowed, smells faintly of caramel in the east. A cook reaches up carefully, unlocks the box, and pinches just a bit, like someone measuring gold dust. She drops it into a simmering pot of almond milk and stirs slowly. You lean in to inhale. It's not just a drink anymore, it's a luxury. Now, in theory, sugar was a medical item. Yes, that's right. Doctors prescribed it. For what you ask, oh, everything. Coughs, melancholy, digestion, broken hearts probably. Apothecaries would mix sugar with herbs and call it a cure. Sometimes they made sugar pills actual balls of sugar and sold them like medieval tic-tac. But for the wealthy, sugar was also theater. Picture this: a banquet table, everything gleaming, and at the center something unbelievable, a sculpture made entirely of sugar, a castle, a unicorn, a knight in full armor. These were called subtleties, and they were meant to dazzle guests. Not necessarily to eat, though some did. Mostly to show off. And here's where the snacks come in. Some of the earliest candy-like treats appeared in medieval courts. Think of small balls made from sugar, spices, nuts, and honey like proto-marzipan, or candied orange peel dipped in syrup, or ginger root preserved in sugar, spicy, sweet, and just a little alarming. You find a small tray of these on the edge of a table. The host notices your curiosity and smiles. They're called dragées, she says. You pop one in your mouth. It's crunchy, sweet, tastes like rose petals, and cloves had a quiet argument. You're not sure if you like it, but you eat two more just to be certain. And then someone offers you a comfit, an almond coated in layer after layer of sugar. It's like the medieval M&M, except more expensive and with a higher risk of dental injury. Not everyone got to taste these, of course. In the average village, sweetness came from honey, not sugar. Beekeeping was common, though not exactly gentle. Hives were sometimes broken open with smoke and prayer. Honey-flavored bread, porridge ale, and medicinal salves. If you were lucky, you'd get a spoonful on holidays. If you were really lucky, someone wouldn't steal it first. Now, for the quirky side note of the evening, in some places, sugar was considered a spice, not a sweetener. It sat on the shelf beside pepper and cinnamon. That's because it wasn't used to make things taste sugary, but to balance, mask, or enhance other flavors. You might find sugar sprinkled on roast meat, or stirred into sauces, or, believe it or not, used in pickling brine. It was experimental, not indulgent. Back in the Great Hall, dessert has arrived. Not cake, not cookies, but something resembling sweetened rice pudding with saffron and dried fruit. It smells like heaven, tastes like a dream, and was probably meant for the bishop sitting 2 chairs down. Which brings us to a favorite historical oddity. During certain banquets, sweet dishes were served before savory ones, because sugar was considered medicinal and therefore deserved priority. That's right, dessert first. Medieval doctors were clearly ahead of their time. Let's wander now just a little to the edge of the kitchen, where a servant is scrubbing a tray. You see crumbs, white powder, a smear of honey. The ghost of sweetness past. It lingers. And now 3 jokes to go with your sugar dreams of medieval sugar, because sometimes medicine should come with sprinkles. If your dessert is shaped like a unicorn, you're either a noble or hallucinating. Come fits the original hard candy challenge: win a treat, lose a tooth. You're feeling a little indulgent now. After all, you just shared a banquet with bishops nibbled on crystallized rose petals and watched a sugar unicorn disintegrate under candlelight. So what's next? Something humble, something sneaky, something you'd never expect to find tucked inside a hat. Tonight, our snack story begins not in a castle, but at a roadside inn. You've just arrived, muddy-booted and weary. The fire crackles. A dog snores under a bench. And in the corner, a traveler pulls off his wide-brimmed cap, revealing surprise: an egg. Yes, an egg. Warm from body heat, cradled gently in straw, hidden like treasure. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Keeps him safe, he says. And if you get stopped by guards, you can always pretend it's a decorative stone. This isn't as odd as it sounds. In the medieval world, eggs were portable snacks, but fragile ones. People tucked them into pouches, baskets, and yes, even hats, using cloth or straw for insulation. If you cracked one open on the road, you either roasted it over fire or boiled it in whatever pot was handy. If no pot, well, you could wrap it in damp cloth and nestle it by the embers. Medieval sous vide. But eggs were more than road snacks. In the right hands, they became an entire category of creative snackery. Picture this, a soft-boiled egg, sliced in half the yolk, scooped out and mashed with herbs, cheese, and a little vinegar, then stuffed back in and served cold. Sound familiar? That's right, the ancestor of the deviled egg. Or maybe you stumble into a monastic kitchen where the brothers are baking tiny tarts filled with scrambled egg, honey, and saffron. They're eaten during feast days, served with fruit and almond milk. And in some northern villages, boiled eggs are diced and mixed with chopped greens and vinegar, a sort of medieval egg salad with fewer regrets. Let's talk about egg freshness. In the absence of refrigeration, medieval cooks tested eggs by floating them in water. If it sank, it was good. If it floated, it was plotting against you. The smell alone would confirm. And then there were the symbolic eggs. At Easter, painted or dyed eggs were gifted between friends. Sometimes they were boiled with onion skins for color. Sometimes painted with herbs or religious icons. An egg wasn't just food, it was hope in a shell. But not all eggs were chicken. You might encounter goose eggs, larger, richer, ideal for feasts. Or quail eggs, delicate and prized. Even fish eggs, sometimes dried and served as salty, crunchy morsels along the coast. You nibble one now. It's odd, briny, like licking a storm cloud. But somehow not unpleasant. Here's your quirky detail of the night some households trained children to collect eggs by singing to the hens. Why? Because calm hens laid more. Or so people believed. Either way, it's adorable. Meanwhile, in a tavern not far from where you sit, someone orders a piper's puff, a simple snack made from beaten egg flour, and herbs dropped into a pan and puffed over flame. Think medieval pancake, but with more personality and fewer blueberries. And here's a scholarly squabble for you. Some historians claim eggs were rare in the peasant diet, mostly saved for festivals or illness. Others argue hens were common and eggs were a daily staple, especially in warmer months. The truth is likely both, depending on where you lived, how many chickens you knew personally, and how often you checked your hat. You leave the inn, a boiled egg wrapped in cloth and stashed safely in your own cap, just in case. The stars are out, and you imagine the world millions of little fires scattered across hills and valleys, each with someone gently tapping an egg on a rock. Tonight, we leave the comfort of hearth and inn and head somewhere a little cooler, a little darker, and perhaps a touch saltier. You're walking along the outer wall of a seaside town. The wind is brisk, briny, and full of fish-scented promises. Because tonight's snack comes straight from the waves. You pass fishermen pulling in their nets, their hands slick with seawater, their voices low and rhythmic. Their catch glints in the moonlight, small silver fish crabs with twitchy legs, and once in a while a wriggling surprise no one quite expected. You follow the scent of something smoky, oily, and oddly comforting until you reach a shack with smoke pouring out the back. Inside, racks of small fish dangle above a fire. The smoke curls upward, drying the fish into leathery, shiny strips. This, dear listener, is smoked snack perfection. Welcome to the world of preserved fish. In the medieval seaside diet, preservation wasn't just a clever option, it was a necessity. You couldn't keep fish fresh for long, especially without snow or cellars. So instead, you salted it, dried it, or smoked it until it resembled jerky with fins. You reach for a thin strip of smoked herring, pull and chew. It's chewy, salty, and smells a bit like history. It's strong, maybe stronger than you'd like, but undeniably filling. And in cold weather, it's downright cozy. But fish wasn't just smoked. Oh no. Pickling was popular, especially inland where fish had to travel. Fish were gutted clean, packed in barrels of brine, then shipped to villages far from the shore. A good salted cod might travel hundreds of miles. A very good salted cod might be traded for a bowl of cloth or 2 jugs of ale. And here's a delightfully odd fact: some travelers tied smoked fish to their belts for easy snacking. You walk, You nibble, you share with a dog. Everyone wins unless you're upwind. Let's head to a fisherman's cottage now. His wife is stirring something on the fire, chunks of dried eel softening in broth. It's for a stew, but she lets you nibble a strip. It's slippery, chewy, and surprisingly good. This is not a Michelin star meal, it's comfort food. Snack as survival. Now, not all fish snacks were humble. In noble households, exotic seafood was a sign of wealth. Think oysters from a distant coast, dried sturgeon, or salted lamprey. Lampreys, those little sea vampires, were actually prized delicacies. Rich, fatty, slippery. Kings requested them specifically. If that doesn't prove medieval royalty had bold taste buds, I don't know what does. And for a brief scholarly squabble, some historians insist fish was a Lenten staple, and that religious fasting rules pushed people to invent all kinds of seafood-based snacks. Others argue that the rules were widely ignored by anyone with enough clout or coin. After all, no meat is a flexible rule when your fish looks, smells, and tastes like a roast. Speaking of religious eating fish paste, a kind of proto-pâté was also common. Made from pounded fish oil herbs and sometimes breadcrumbs, it was spread on slices of stale bread and consumed with a gulp of ale. Not unlike tuna salad, if your tuna was smoked over peat and your salad came from a mossy ditch. You wander back toward the harbor, the last bites of dried anchovy on your tongue. Around you, children poke sticks into tide pools hoping for crabs. A gull screeches overhead. Someone is grilling something mysterious and fish-shaped over. You've had snacks from the land, the sea, and even a few tucked-in hats. Tonight, let's take a little detour, not away from food, but away from plates. Because this medieval snack, it comes inside a loaf of bread. You're standing in a quiet stone kitchen. It smells earthy and warm like ash flour and yesterday's memories. A thick round loaf is on the table, dark crust split down the center. But it's not for slicing, it's for pouring. Yes, tonight we're diving into the humble, hearty world of soup and bread. Not as a garnish, not beside it, but literally inside the bread. A young cook lifts the top off the loaf like a lid, and steam curls upward. Inside is a thick, lumpy soup somewhere between stew and porridge. Lentils, bits of onion, maybe bacon if you're lucky. It's rich, warm, and it's soaking into the walls of the bread, softening them into edible cutlery. You grab a wooden spoon, though honestly, fingers would do, and scoop up a bite. The crust has turned tender, but the bottom still holds strong. This is snack bowl and napkin in one tidy package. In many villages, bread trenchers weren't just used as plates, they became part of the meal. After holding hot soup, they absorbed all the flavor, all the oils, all the essence. You'd eat the soupy crust last like dessert, but savory, like a gravy-flavored marshmallow, sort of. Now, this wasn't only a peasant trick. Even in noble halls, fancy soppy loaves were carved out to hold spiced broths or sweetened wine. Sops, that's the technical term, were bits of bread soaked in liquid, often wine or ale, and served to the elderly or sick who couldn't chew hard foods. Essentially, the original medieval snack pudding. This leads us to an odd tradition, the SOP giver at banquets. A designated person who would ladle wine or broth over toasted bread for honored guests. A soggy job, but someone had to do it. As you eat, the cook tells you how the best loaves for soup had to be 2 days old, firm enough to hold shape, soft enough to eat. Too fresh and they'd dissolve. Too stale and you'd need a chisel. Let's pause here for your quirky fact. Some monasteries baked bread, specifically shaped like bowls with raised sides and hollow centers. These were both economical and spiritually symbolic, the body feeding the soul quite literally. Meanwhile, in the bustling alleys outside, street vendors sell smaller versions of these bread bowls filled with peas gravy or mashed turnips. People walk and eat, tearing the loaf as they go, licking gravy from their fingers, and then crucially throwing nothing away. Breadcrumbs were swept up, saved and reused. Waste was a luxury no one could afford. And yes, if you were feeling fancy, sweet sop loaves could be soaked in spice, milk, honey, and rosewater. A proto-bread pudding served warm by candlelight and possibly stolen by a younger sibling before dessert was announced. For your academic tangent, some argue the SOP is the direct ancestor of French toast, soaked bread fried, or baked into a golden treat. Others say the connection is symbolic, not culinary. Either way, next time you have brunch, you can thank a 14th century monk with a ladle. You finish your last bite. The bowl is gone, your hands are sticky, and your stomach hums with soft warmth. It's not dramatic food, but it's gentle, and sometimes that's exactly what a snack should be. And now 3 toasty jokes to sop up your day medieval bread bowls, because who needs dishes when you can eat them? If your soup leaks through your bowl, congratulations, you're too modern. Sopping bread in wine, the original multitasking meal and mood stabilizer. Tonight we turn from bowls of soup to something a little trickier. Something slippery, sneaky, and sweet, but not always for the reasons you'd expect. Tonight's snack is not just food, it's scandal, it's suspicion, it's the missing fig. You find yourself in a bustling merchant stall at the edge of a medieval town square. Bolts of cloth hang like banners. Pots and shoes line the walkway. And near the back, tucked between a barrel of almonds and a very bored-looking goat, sits a small wooden crate. Inside, wrinkled, shiny, fragrant little gems, dried figs. You reach in, pick one up. It's soft, sugary, almost floral. A bite reveals a chewy, syrupy texture, dotted with tiny seeds that crunch under your teeth. It's rich, almost too rich. The kind of snack that makes you check your pockets after eating it, because surely something this decadent should cost more than it looks. And you'd be right, because figs, like many medieval fruits, were both food and currency. Imported, taxed, and often subject to strict trade laws, they became tiny edible symbols of class and power. You didn't just eat a fig, you declared something with it. I have access. I know a merchant. I bribed the gatekeeper. Which leads us to a curious medieval crime: fig smuggling. Yes, actual fig-related smuggling. Some markets impose taxes on foreign fruits to protect local produce, or just line noble pockets. So people would sneak figs in, hidden in sacks of grain, folded into cloth bundles, or even stuffed into loaves of bread. The baker looks guilty. The bread smells fruity. Coincidence? Even monasteries weren't immune. There are records of monks being caught with suspiciously full pantries right after donations of dried fruit arrived from distant benefactors. Whoops. Now, why figs? Well, they traveled well, they were naturally sweet. Remember, sugar was rare, and they were versatile. You could eat them alone, soak them in wine, stuff them into pastries, boil them into syrup, even mix them with meat, yes, meat, to balance savory dishes. A fig and lamb pie, surprisingly popular. Some wealthy kitchens even shaped dried figs into flowers, pressing and folding them into tiny edible art pieces. Served on silver plates with a drizzle of honey and crushed almonds. If you ever doubted the creativity of medieval cooks, let this be your figgy wake-up call. Your quirky fact of the night: in certain towns, children were paid in dried figs for errands or chores. Better than a coin, some would say, until your little brother eats your wages. And in case you're wondering about etiquette, it was considered rude to eat more than 2 figs at a time during formal gatherings. Why? Because 3 meant greed, or worse, lust. Some thought the shape of a fig was suggestive. I'll let your imagination wander gently and then wander right back, because this is a PG-13 bedtime story. You step outside now, fig in hand, and watch as a passing noblewoman drops a silk pouch. It bursts open. Not coins, not jewels, but figs spilling across the ground like forgotten treasure. She gasps, a crowd gathers, and someone, perhaps you just casually, picks one up. Finders keepers. Academic debate break. Some historians insist dried fruit was common, found in markets and lunch baskets across classes. Others claim these imports were primarily for the rich, with peasants only tasting them on holidays or by accident. As always, the truth likely lies in the middle, and probably inside a suspicious pastry. You bite the last of your fig. Sweet, sticky, worth a minor arrest probably, but no regrets. Tonight we shift from scandal to simplicity, from contraband figs to something far more grounded, humble, dusty, and frankly a little gassy. That's right, you're entering the warm, rattling world of chickpeas. You're walking through a dry countryside road, the kind where your boots kick up little clouds with every step. The sun is low, the sky gold, and from somewhere ahead you hear a familiar sound: crack, crunch, chatter. That's the rhythm of the medieval chickpea vendor. You round the corner, and there she is, a woman with sun-lined cheeks and a cloth basket full of hot roasted chickpeas. They're still sizzling, still whispering heat. She ladles some into a cone of folded parchment and hands it to you with a grin. "Careful," she says. They bite back. You pop one into your mouth. It's nutty, warm, a little singed at the edges. Then another, and another. Within minutes, your fingers are dusty and your mouth is full. Congratulations, you're now experiencing the original medieval snack mix, minus the raisins and pretzels. Roasted chickpeas were everywhere. Easy to grow, easy to dry, and very easy to snack on. Vendors sold them on street corners, outside city gates, in front of taverns, even near churches. They were the popcorn of their day, cheap, hot, and dangerously addictive. But they weren't just for nibbling. Sometimes chickpeas were ground into flour and fried into flat little patties, or boiled with garlic and greens for a peasant stew. In some regions, they were mashed with vinegar and oil into a kind of proto-hummus, chunkier, earthier, but still incredibly satisfying. And here's a lovely detail: in some villages, chickpeas were flavored with ash. Yes, ash. From sweet burning wood. The smoke added depth, and the ash a little crunch, a little mineral, and a reminder that flavor has always been partly about daring. You wander into a nearby tavern, the kind with creaky benches and gossip hanging in the air. On one table, a group of travelers are rolling chickpeas between their palms. It's not just food, it's a conversation aid. You flick one across the table. It hits someone's mug. They raise an eyebrow. A dual number, just snack diplomacy. This brings us to tonight's odd little fact: chickpeas were sometimes used to tell fortunes. Toss a handful on a cloth, watch how they fall. Clump together, a storm's coming. Spread out, good luck. Land in someone's soup, you owe them a new bowl. And here's our academic whisper. There's debate among food historians about just how widespread chickpeas really were. Some argue they were mostly a southern crop found in Spain, Italy, parts of North Africa. Others claim they spread far and wide via trade routes and made their crunchy mark nearly everywhere. The only thing we know for sure, someone somewhere definitely choked on one. Let's not forget the social side of this legume. Chickpeas were called poor man's nuts in certain texts, not because they were second-rate, but because they filled the same role: high protein, low fuss, and perfect for pockets. Some children were even given chickpeas in place of coins during festivals. Cheap, cheerful, and non-chalkable with adult supervision. You head back out onto the road now, pocketing the last warm handful. The sun's gone down. The wind's picked up. But there's a simple joy in walking with your food in your hand, and nothing much to worry about except perhaps the very real risk of dropping one down your shirt. Tonight we move from crunchy chickpeas to something smoother, creamier, slipperier, and just a little bit chaotic. Welcome to the curious case of the butter that ran away. You're standing in a sunlit farmhouse kitchen, the kind with clay tiles, hanging herbs, and one too many cats. On the table sits a wooden churn, half barrel, half mystery. A young woman pumps the handle with steady rhythm, and inside milk is becoming gold. Butter, but not the neat yellow sticks we know today. This is rustic, pale, slightly lumpy. And if it's a hot day like it is now, it's also melting before your eyes. Medieval butter had a complicated life. It was precious, especially in places where cows didn't always cooperate. It required patience, strength, and timing. But once made, it became everything: a cooking fat, a spread, a sauce base, even a gift. A good batch of butter could earn you praise, a spoiled one. A scolding from both your mother and your priest. Because here's the thing, butter wasn't always welcome. In some medieval Christian communities, butter was forbidden during Lent and other fasting periods. No meat, no dairy, no fun. But in colder northern regions, Germany, Scandinavia, parts of England, people rebelled. Quietly, with toast. And that led to a delightful twist of history: butter licenses. That's right. In some areas, people actually had to pay the church for permission to eat butter during Lent. Whole families pooled coins so grandma could slather her barley loaf in peace. It was theology, economics, and snack politics all in one greasy package. Let's step outside. A child runs past holding a chunk of butter wrapped in leaves. It slips, falls, and slides across the dirt path like a golden comet. She chases it. The chickens join in. Chaos ensues. Welcome to the medieval butter crisis. Refrigeration didn't exist, and butter melts fast, especially in summer. That's why people stored it underground or in cool stream-fed basins or sealed in ceramic jars. Some even salted the butter heavily to preserve it, resulting in a snack so salty it could make your eyes water and your aunt disown you. Now, not all butter was cow-based. In some regions, especially in mountainous or forested areas, people made goat butter or sheep butter. Stronger flavor, slightly gamier, and absolutely a taste you remembered whether you wanted to or not. Here's your quirky detail of the night butter was used in courtship. That's right. In some rural traditions, a suitor might give a carefully churned pat of butter to his beloved, shaped into flowers, animals, or brace yourself a little heart. My love is rich, soft, and melts under pressure, he might say. Romantic, maybe. Unstable in warm weather, definitely. Let's not forget butter's less edible uses. It was rubbed into hair for shine until the flies came. It was slathered on wounds. Don't try this at home. It was even burned as fuel in some northern homes where candles were scarce and the nights were long. As you watch another batch of butter take shape, you notice how rhythmic it all is. The churning, the folding, the rinsing. It's not fast food, it's patient food. Snack through labor, and somehow that makes it taste better. Here's your academic flavor enhancer. Some historians argue that butter was mostly for peasants, while nobles preferred oils, olive nut, or sesame. Others insist that noble kitchens prize sweet butter as a delicacy. In truth, it likely depended on geography, season, and which cow was having a good week. You step back into the kitchen. A fresh piece of dark rye bread waits for you. The butter spreads slowly, melting into the grain. No honey. Tonight we're heading into the woods, not for mushrooms, not for berries, but for something that crackles, hisses, and occasionally explodes. That's right. Tonight's medieval snack is fried food. You didn't expect that, did you? You're standing beside a makeshift stall at the edge of a traveling fair. The air is thick with wood smoke and laughter. Children chase wooden hoops. A lute plays somewhere far too enthusiastically. And above all, you smell oil, hot, fragrant, slightly nutty. Welcome to the deep-fried corner of the Middle Ages. Yes, they had frying. No, they didn't have deep fryers. But hot oil in a pan over fire? Absolutely. And if you think they were cautious, you are adorably mistaken. Because frying in medieval times wasn't just cooking, it was performance art. The vendor beside you ladles batter into a pan. It sizzles immediately. You lean in. The batter puffs up golden and crisp. He flips it with a grin and says, "This one's pear," or parsnip. You'll know soon enough. You get your prize on a square of rough cloth, no plates here. You bite in. The outside is crisp, the inside soft and sweet. It's not fast food, it's flickering fire food, and it's perfect. These little morsels were called many things depending on the region: fritters, sippets, rissoles. Some were filled with minced fruit, others with cheese, spiced meat, or mashed beans. They were battered in flour, egg, or ale, and always fried in whatever fat was on hand, lard, butter, or oil. Let's be honest, it wasn't always clean. The pan was reused. The oil was optimistic. The result, flavors layered upon flavors. Pear today, onion tomorrow, surprise squirrel on Thursday. Here's your crunchy curiosity for the night. In noble households, fried food was a test of skill. Oil was expensive, timing was everything, and a burned fritter could get you booted from the kitchen. Successfully fried cheese balls that could land you praise or at least first pick at dinner. And not just savory snacks, sweet ones too. There are recipes for apple fritters dusted with rose sugar, almond pastries fried until bubbling, even early versions of donuts, balls of dough, fried then rolled in honey and sesame. You wipe your fingers, they're glossy. Your soul feels slightly shinier too. Of course, frying had its risks: fires, burns, broken pans. And this is real falling into the pot. There's a monastic tale of a novice who leaned too close, tripped, and had to be pulled out with tongs. He survived. The fritters did not. Wandering deeper into the fair, you spot a trio of children sharing a cone of crispy chickpea cakes. Nearby, someone is experimenting with fried leeks. Another stall offers fish crisps which smell like a dare and sound like a crunch. And here comes your academic sizzle. Some historians believe frying was limited to upper-class kitchens due to the cost of oil. Others point to market records showing vendors selling fried food at fairs and festivals, suggesting it was more common and more beloved than once thought. You sit now cross-legged on a patch of dry grass, your belly full of mystery batter. The stars come out, a spark pops from a nearby fire, and the smell of frying continues warm and familiar. It's comfort, it's celebration, it's chaos with crisp edges. And now 3 jokes to fry your worries away, medieval frying, because sometimes boiling just isn't dramatic enough. Surprise fritter fillings, friendship ender, or new holiday tradition. If your snack crackles louder than your dinner conversation, it's working. Tonight we wander away from the noise, away from the crackling fry pans and greasy cloth napkins. You're walking now, just you, your thoughts, and the faint rustle of wind in barley fields. Because this snack, it's quiet, sacred even, a bite taken with reverence. Welcome to the world of monastic snacking. You approach a low stone building tucked behind a small hill. It's not grand, no gold, just modest stained glass and a well-swept courtyard. Inside, monks move in near silence, brown robes, sandaled feet, and faces equal parts, serene and hungry. One of them gestures gently and offers you a small wooden bowl. Inside are simple squares of baked cheese and honey, soft, warm, lightly brown. You bite. It's sweet, creamy, and surprisingly fragrant. A pinch of nutmeg, maybe. A hint of rosemary. Definitely joy. Monasteries, you see, were the unexpected snack havens of the Middle Ages. They farmed, they cooked. They invented things, including some of the finest cheeses, beers, and pastries of their time. But not for gluttony, for sustenance, for silence, for ritual. You sit on a low bench as the evening bells chime. A novice places a tray nearby, thin slices of rye bread, stewed apples, roasted nuts. There's even a little tartlet, a puffed shell filled with egg custard and sprinkled with ground herbs. You look up. He winks. Feast day, he whispers. Because in the monastic calendar, fasting and feasting dance together. Some days were plain barley porridge and pickled turnips. Other days, cheese fritters with honey glaze, sweet rice cooked in almond milk, even candied pine nuts. Here's tonight's odd truth. Monks were required to eat in silence, so they developed a whole system of hand signals to request food. One motion meant bread, another meant more ale. A discreet twirl of the finger, who took my fig tart, and monastic cooks' legends. These were not bored peasants burning soup. These were men who measured flour by candlelight, tasted broth by instinct, and stirred pots while reciting Latin. Some recipes were so well guarded, they were written in code. Let's not forget the drinks. You sip from a clay cup, now cool, cloudy ale, brewed with herbs and wild yeast. Monks didn't just make snacks, they made sipping snacks too. Academic footnote of the evening, there's debate about whether monastic kitchens were simple outposts of survival or epicenters of culinary innovation. Some say monks ate like peasants. Others point to recipe books, imported spices, and detailed menus. Truth, likely both. Some monks ate roots, others cheesecake with theological justification. You walk through the garden now, bees buzz, violets bloom, and at the edge of the herb patch sits a tiny clay pot, rosemary honey meant for sore throats, but sometimes just for bread. A spoonful on your tongue, and you understand something. Not every snack needs a market or a festival. Some just need quiet hands, quiet hearts, and a good recipe. Tonight you find yourself at a crossroads, not of cities or kingdoms, but of taste and memory. We've walked past markets, wandered through monasteries, and ducked under butter churns. But tonight's snack is something quieter, humbler, and perhaps more forgotten than most. It's the snack of someone waiting. You're sitting on a small wooden stool outside a thatched cottage. The sky is turning gray with dusk. A pot simmers inside. A mother hums softly as she stirs it. Beside her, on the table, a small pile of apple cores and pea pods. And nestled between them, a handful of roasted grains, barley, wheat, rye, even spelt. She sprinkles in a little salt, some leftover bacon grease from yesterday, and stirs the mixture on a hot stone. Within minutes, it becomes something between popcorn and porridge toasted grain clusters. Nothing fancy, But oh, the smell, nutty, warm, a little smoky, a little wild. You're handed a bit in a folded cloth. You chew, it pops, it crunches, it stays with you. And so does the feeling that you're eating not just food, but the rhythm of waiting. For dinner, for letters, for spring. These roasted grains, sometimes called puffed grains or cracked grain bites, were common in households across the medieval world. You'd scoop them up from the bottom of the granary, roast them over embers, and share them among children and gossipers alike. You peer inside the kitchen again. The pot is fuller now, barley stew probably. It bubbles patiently, but no one's hurrying it, because there's snack before supper, and supper comes when it's ready. And here's tonight's gentle twist. These snacks were often made by children. Left alone with a fire and a spoon, they'd roast leftover seeds or pulses with ash and herbs, then nibble their experiments while the grown-ups churned butter or mended shoes. Snack is play, snack is rebellion, snack is science. Let's go a bit further. A neighbor invites you to try puffed peas cracked dried, then toasted with vinegar and thyme. They squeak between your teeth. They're weird. They're perfect. Or how about a bit of popped sorghum if you're traveling through warmer climates? It looks like tiny popcorn, tastes faintly of nuts, and is oddly delightful when mixed with melted sheep's cheese and mint. Your quirky fact for tonight: in some parts of early medieval Europe, snacking was discouraged during daylight hours, especially during Lent or on fast days. So children would hide their little grain clusters in pockets, corners, or hollowed out loaves. A secret snack society, the grain underground, if you will. And here's your scholarly spark. Some argue these snacks were so simple they don't deserve the name snack. They were just edible byproducts of larger meals. But others argue exactly the opposite, that their simplicity made them important. Intentional, nourishing in more ways than one. You lean back now. The cottage door creaks open. A bowl is placed in your lap. Stew warm and rich. You eat, but your fingers still itch for one last toasted grain. Not because you're still hungry, but because that flavor belongs to the in-between. And now, 3 final nibbles of humor before we rest this chapter. Toasted grains, because sometimes you just want your food to crackle with emotion. If your snack hides in your pocket, it's either brilliant or rebellious. Medieval kids didn't have candy, but they sure knew how to burn barley beautifully. Let's start tonight not with a snack, but with a bell. A soft toll in the distance. A call to evening prayer or maybe supper. The kind of sound that carries through stone walls and sleepy gardens. And with it, the gentle clink of wooden bowls being set down on long tables. Because tonight we revisit a space we've wandered before, but this time with new eyes. The monastic dining hall. But this isn't a feast day. No almond tarts, no honey-glazed cheese puffs. Tonight is a fast day, and that means quiet food. Humble food. The kind of food that asks nothing from you except your gratitude and maybe your teeth. You take a seat among the monks, your presence welcomed with a nod, no words. In front of you, a bowl. Inside, a stew that looks like it was made by someone trying not to enjoy themselves. Lentils, turnips, barley, a strip of cabbage that's seen better centuries. And yet, it smells warm, comforting, full of garlic and slow simmered care. You take a spoonful, it's plain, then flavorful, then surprisingly delicate. This isn't punishment, this is restraint as recipe. You see, monastic fasts didn't always mean eating nothing. They meant avoiding meat, dairy, eggs, anything indulgent. But within those rules, creativity bloomed. Cooks turned herbs, legumes, and vegetables into quiet miracles. No butter use oil, no meat add smoked salt or dried mushrooms, no joy add thyme. It always helps. Tonight's snack isn't one dish, it's a constellation of small intentional bites. A slice of oat bread still warm, a dried apple ring, a spoonful of preserved beans brined and sour, a thimble of vinegar syrup just to wake the senses. Quirky detail of the evening, some monasteries made snacks specifically for the sick called comfort bowls. Warm broth with a floating dumpling, bread soaked in sweetened wine, even candied herbs for sore throats. Medicine by way of food administered with prayer and spoon. And sometimes the line between snack and sacrament blurred. You glance at the monk beside you, he's chewing slowly, eyes closed. You wonder if he's tasting lentils or memory. Outside in the herb garden, the novices gather wild mint and marigold to dry for teas. These were the silent snacks brewed and shared after Vespers. No sugar, just warmth, a pause between work and rest. Here's your academic whisper for tonight. Some argue that monastic recipes influenced regional cuisine more than any royal court ever did. Monks kept notes, shared seeds, perfected techniques, but they didn't write cookbooks. They lived them in wood smoke and clay bowls. And so you finish your meal, not full but balanced, not excited but peaceful. A snack not for pleasure but for presence. Some nights begin with music, others with laughter, but tonight begins with a rule. No meat, no dairy, no fun. That's what the parchment reads, tacked to the kitchen wall in an abbey somewhere nestled between cold hills and colder doctrine. It's Lent again, which means dinner must be thoughtful, restrained, but never boring. And so our snack tonight is a tribute to fast day ingenuity, when creativity had to sneak in through the back door of austerity. You're standing in a stone-walled kitchen, breath fogging slightly in the chill. A novice is stirring a pot with great solemnity. Inside grains lentils, a bit of dried apple, and something that smells suspiciously like mushroom. He doesn't look up. He just says, "Try it." You do. It's warm, grounding, and rich in a way that shouldn't be possible with so few ingredients. And there's the secret layering flavor from scarcity. It's an art form. These meals weren't snacks in the modern sense. They were pauses, fillers, little meals nestled between prayer reading or labor. And sometimes they were acts of rebellion in disguise, like almond cheese, a paste made from ground almonds shaped and salted until it resembled something far richer. Or mock eggs crafted from yellow pea puree, molded into spheres, served cold, garnished with herbs, and met with a shrug from the abbot. Because no matter the restriction, humans will find a loophole. Take fish milk. Yes, you heard that right. In certain monasteries during particularly strict fasts, records show monks boiling fish bones into broth and calling it milk to replace dairy. Clever, absolutely. Delicious, let's not speculate. Or consider pea sausage, a grayish-green log made from pureed legumes rolled in breadcrumbs and fried in oil. It didn't taste like meat. It didn't pretend to. But it had substance, and in winter that was enough. Tonight's quirky detail on especially long fast monks were sometimes allowed one indulgence, called the little grace. It was a single bite of preserved fruit, or a spoonful of honey. One moment of sweetness meant not to excite, but to restore. The idea was let the body know it is not forgotten. Outside the chapel, bells toll. You walk through the courtyard clutching a warm flatbread made from oat flour and crushed herbs. It crumbles as you bite, a little dry, a little holy. You pass a group of nuns tending bees in silence. One offers you a taste of their fasting, honey-thin, diluted, stored in clay pots. It's not thick, but it lingers. And here comes your academic footnote of the night. Some scholars argue fast day snacks were symbolic, meant to humble the senses. Others say they were a chance to refine taste using fewer ingredients to make deeper impressions. A spoonful of truth in a bowl of restraint. You return to your corner in the refectory where a monk shares a small tart. The crust is barley, the filling is pickled greens and vinegar-thickened broth. It's sharp, oddly refreshing. You eat in silence, not full, but centered. And now your 3 fast-friendly jokes. Some nights begin with music, others with laughter. But tonight begins with a rule. No meat, no dairy, no fun. That's what the parchment reads, tacked to the kitchen wall in an abbey somewhere nestled between cold hills and colder doctrine. It's Lent again, which means dinner must be thoughtful, restrained, but never boring. And so our snack tonight is a tribute to fast day ingenuity when creativity had to sneak in through the back door of austerity. You're standing in a stone-walled kitchen, breath fogging slightly in the chill. A novice is stirring a pot with great solemnity. Inside grains lentils, a bit of dried apple, and something that smells suspiciously like mushroom. He doesn't look up. He just says, "Try it." You do. It's warm, grounding, and rich in a way that shouldn't be possible with so few ingredients. And there's the secret layering flavor from scarcity. It's an art form. These meals weren't snacks in the modern sense. They were pauses, fillers, little meals nestled between prayer reading or labor. and sometimes they were acts of rebellion in disguise. Like almond cheese, a paste made from ground almonds shaped and salted until it resembled something far richer. Or mock eggs crafted from yellow pea puree molded into spheres. Served cold, garnished with herbs, and met with a shrug from the abbot. Because no matter the restriction, humans will find a loophole. Take fish milk. Yes, you heard that right. In certain monasteries, during particularly strict fasts, records show monks boiling fish bones into broth and calling it milk to replace dairy. Clever, absolutely. Delicious, let's not speculate. Or consider pea sausage, a grayish-green log made from pureed legumes rolled in breadcrumbs and fried in oil. It didn't taste like meat. It didn't pretend to. But it had substance, and in winter, that was enough. Tonight's quirky detail on especially long fast monks were sometimes allowed one indulgence. Called the Little Grace, it was a single bite of preserved fruit or a spoonful of honey. One moment of sweetness meant not to excite, but to restore. The idea was let the body know it is not forgotten. Outside the chapel, bells toll. You walk through the courtyard clutching a warm flatbread made from oat flour and crushed herbs. It crumbles as you bite. A little dry, a little holy. You pass a group of nuns tending bees in silence. One offers you a taste of their fasting, honey-thin diluted stored in clay pots. It's not thick, but it lingers. And here comes your academic footnote of the night. Some scholars argue fast-day snacks were symbolic, meant to humble the senses. Others say they were a chance to refine taste, using fewer ingredients to make deeper impressions. A spoonful of truth in a bowl of restraint. You return to your corner in the refectory where a monk shares a small tart. The crust is barley. The filling is pickled greens and vinegar-thickened broth. It's sharp, oddly refreshing. You eat in silence. Not full, but centered. And now your three fast-friendly jokes. Some meals are remembered for their flavor, others for their comfort. But a rare few like tonight's snack are remembered because they were just plain strange. The sun has set behind thick clouds and you're walking along a narrow path lined with torches. Ahead there's a low building with mismatched shutters and a suspiciously enthusiastic smell of cloves. Welcome to the home of the experimental cook. He greets you at the door, smiling too much, apron too stained. Come in, he says. We're making mock fish tonight. You hesitate, he insists. You enter. Inside the kitchen is an aromatic war zone. Bowls of crushed walnuts, pots of sweetened grain paste, a clay mold shaped like, yes, a trout. He proudly lifts it and pours in a beige mixture that smells like cinnamon and dill. It'll taste like fish, he whispers, but it's mostly raisins. You blink. This is the realm of culinary illusion, where medieval cooks, especially those working under strict fast day rules, created dishes so convincing in shape, color, and texture that diners often had no idea what they were actually eating. Take fish milk, for instance. You've heard whispers, you've doubted, but here it is, a warm, white liquid made by boiling fish bones and skins with herbs and wine strained and served in ceramic mugs. It tastes briny, comforting, confusing. The cook winks. Tastes like Lent. Then there's the egg pie with no eggs made, with mashed peas, almond flour, and saffron for color. Baked in a crust and dusted with sugar and pepper. It's sweet, it's savory, and it's deeply committed to being nothing it claims to be. And here's tonight's delightful absurdity. People once made fake legs of lamb out of rice and dates shaped into shanks, spiced and roasted. For Lent, of course. Because if you're going to abstain, why not abstain in style? You sit at the table and try a slice of honey ham made of turnip glazed with thickened mead and scored to look like pork skin. It's soft, sweet, and vaguely meaty. Paired with sour green herbs, it tastes passable. Paired with humor, delicious. Why go to all this trouble? Because in a world of rules, religious, seasonal cultural food was one of the few places where people could bend without breaking. These fake foods weren't just substitutions. They were play, a wink, a shrug at divine guidelines. Now, for a side serving of scholarly debate, some culinary historians believe imitation food was driven by sheer necessity, making do with what you had. Others argue it reflected early haute cuisine sophistication, and pride through technique and surprise. Was it peasant practicality or noble performance? Likely, both. A soft bell rings. The cook serves dessert. It's a pear, except it's not. It's a ball of ground almond shaped and dyed with parsley and elderflower, then baked until just firm. You bite in. It's sweet, it's chewy, it's completely pearless, and yet it makes you grin. Because here in this flickering room of faux meats and fabled flavors, you've discovered a truth. Even within restriction, people reach for delight. Let's begin tonight not with a kitchen, but with a garden. A small one, walled, sun-dappled, and buzzing gently with bees. You're barefoot walking between rows of herbs and crooked vegetables, following the scent of mint and the sound of someone humming. It's peaceful, quiet, but hidden here among the thyme and leeks is a tiny miracle of medieval ingenuity. Tonight's snack isn't flamboyant. It doesn't pretend to be a fish or wear a disguise. It's honest, fragrant, and oddly sparkling. You kneel by a raised bed as a gardener hand stained green offers you a candied violet. It glistens in the sun. You hesitate, then place it on your tongue. It's crisp, floral, lightly sweet. And in that moment, you understand something essential. Beauty was meant to be edible. Welcome to the world of flower snacks. In the Middle Ages, gardens weren't just for vegetables. They were for medicine, ceremony, and yes, flavor. Flowers like violets, rose petals, elderflowers, and marigolds weren't merely decorative. They were dried, steeped, crystallized, pickled, and turned into sugared treats for the gentle-hearted. And these weren't limited to nobility. Many monastic gardens grew borage and lavender specifically for infusions and candies which were said to gladden the spirit and soothe the stomach. Think of it as medieval herbal therapy with a spoonful of sugar. The cook appears from behind a curtain of drying chamomile and hands you a tiny dish. Inside are petal crisps, rose petals brushed with egg white dusted with sugar and baked until delicate and translucent. You bite into one, and it shatters gently like a memory. The flavor is perfume and paper. Somehow it works. But flower snacks weren't always gentle. Sometimes they were spicy. Recipes from Moorish Spain describe spiced rose preserves laced with black pepper and vinegar. Other regions mixed saffron with honey and fig to create a golden paste called sun fruit, shaped into rounds and dried on leaves. Tonight's quirky truth: some medieval physicians prescribed candied marigold petals as a cure for gloom. You'd carry a few in a pouch, nibble them slowly, and wait for melancholy to lift. Whether it worked spiritually at least. And then there were herb sugar cubes, tiny pressed squares of crushed mint sugar and lemon peel. They were kept in little tins passed around at the end of meals, or slipped discreetly to travelers as a gesture of care. Back in the garden, a novice brings out a tray of jellied violets made from boiled petals, clarified honey, and a touch of wine set with fish gelatin, because of course everything needs a medieval twist. You scoop one with a wooden spoon, it wiggles, you laugh, it tastes like spring. Maybe love, maybe both. And now for your scholarly bloom, some argue these snacks were symbolic acts, ways to eat beauty and embody virtue. Others say they were simply pleasant edible perfumes in a world without much soap. The truth likely somewhere in the middle where sugar meets sentiment. As the sun sets behind the garden wall, you walk past a row of drying bundles, lavender, sage, and elderflower swaying in the breeze. A bee lands on your sleeve. You let it rest. You leave with a candied rose tucked into your pocket, ready to dissolve on your tongue the next time the world feels heavy. Some nights begin with bells, some with birdsong. But tonight begins with a knock, not on a door, but on a barrel. You're in the back corner of a bustling tavern. The fire is low, the table's full, and the atmosphere warm in that clumsy, timeless way that only a room full of tipsy people and poorly played lutes can provide. The innkeeper's bent over a cask, tapping it gently with a wooden mallet. A young server hovers nearby, holding not mugs but trays. Because tonight we're not sipping, we're snacking on drink. Welcome to the peculiar, gelatinous, and surprisingly refined world of medieval beer snacks. Not snacks with beer, but snacks made from it. The first tray lands on your table. What you see is a round golden brown object the size of a walnut. You poke it, it jiggles. This one's called a barm cake, the server says, disappearing back into the crowd. You take a bite. It's dense, slightly sweet, a little sour. The texture is airy with that unmistakable tang of fermentation. Barm, the frothy yeast foam, skimmed from the top of fermenting ale, was once considered waste by brewers. But bakers quickly realized it was a treasure. They began using it to leaven dough, giving rise pun very much intended to beer-based breads and pastries with rich, tangy flavor. These became known in some regions as barm cakes, and while they could be made into full loaves, they were often shaped into compact, snackable rolls, easy to eat with one hand and spill with the other. Barm wasn't just for bread, though. It was also used in batter. Fish, root vegetables, even dried apples were dipped in beer yeast batter and fried until crisp. You nibble one now, a sliver of parsnip, lightly puffed warm and gently bitter in the best way. Another tray arrives, this time a shallow dish filled with beer cheese, a soft whipped concoction made from aged cheese blended with spiced ale and a little mustard seed. It's spread on dark rye and topped with chopped herbs. One bite and you understand why monks and taverners alike hoarded old cheese with reverent care. Fermentation stacked on fermentation, it's culinary recursion, and it's wonderful. And here's tonight's first strange but true detail. Some inns offered solidified beer jellies as dessert. These were made by reducing sweetened ale with spices and thickening it with isinglass of gelatin made from fish bladder. The result was a soft, wobbly cube flavored like honeyed bread and very mild regret. You pop one into your mouth now. It tastes like medieval fruit leather and childhood mistakes. Still you take another. Across the room, a man is eating what looks like a fried meatball. But it's not meat. It's beer grain mashed the leftover gruel from the brewing process, formed into patties with onion herbs, and breadcrumbs then fried in dripping. Crunchy outside, soft inside, and surprisingly satisfying. Waste not want, not especially in a century where want was more common than not. Now let's step outside into the back courtyard of the inn. Barrels line the wall, some leaking, some whispering. A brewer stands beside a steaming cauldron stirring wort the unfermented beer base. She ladles some into a mug and hands it to you. Before the magic, she says, "It's warm, sweet, and malty with hints of herbs and spice. Not alcohol, not quite tea, something in between." In some towns, this pre-beer was mixed with oats or stale bread and eaten as a kind of beer porridge, especially by laborers or anyone who wanted the taste of ale without the headache. You sip again slower this time. Here's your academic bubble for the evening. There's debate among historians as to whether beer was seen primarily as a beverage, a health tonic, or a base ingredient. Some monasteries classified different beers by strength and used table beer for meals, physic ale for illness, holy ale for guests, and yes, baking ale for bread making. Even children drank beer, though low-alcohol versions brewed quickly and with less fermentable sugar. These were safer than water and gentler than wine, called small ale or small beer. And you better believe someone made beer biscuits for toddlers, because history is nothing if not practical. Let's wander back inside. The innkeeper's wife is carrying a platter piled high with bread, soaked in ale, then toasted with honey and rosemary. It's a cross between French toast bread pudding and an edible lullaby. You take a slice. It's warm and golden, the crust caramelized, the inside gooey. Medieval comfort food. Nearby, someone's selling beer-cured sausage made from ground pork, aged in beer brine and herbs. It's sharp, salty, slightly fizzy. You're full, but curiosity wins. Now for the most bizarre tale of the evening, in one town's record, from the 14th century, a woman was fined for attempting to brew a loaf, which scholars believe referred to her efforts to leaven bread, using only beer, no flour. The result was a kind of bread-beer hybrid, dense sour, and possibly illegal. Innovation or intoxication, hard to say. Probably both. You lean back now, resting your elbows on the table, surrounded by bowls of beer batter, whipped cheese-toasted barley, and sweet malted jellies. It's not elegant, it's not refined, but it's generous. The kind of food made with what's left behind, or what bubbles over. As the lute music winds down, someone hands you one last snack, a thin wafer of barley sugar made by boiling down malted barley water and letting it harden into amber sheets. You crack off a corner with your teeth. It tastes like toffee and revolution. Because beer wasn't just a drink in the Middle Ages, it was an ingredient, a flavor, a medium for memory. The kitchen brewed it, The baker kneaded it, the sick sipped it, and the hungry turned it into snacks worth remembering. Every era has its guilty pleasures. Ours might be midnight snacks from the fridge. Theirs that quiet crunch you hear under a monk's sleeve during evening prayer. Tonight begins in the shadows of a cloister wall where someone is breaking a rule not with a sword or a sermon, but with a biscuit. That's right. Tonight's story is about forbidden cookies. You crouch beside a narrow stone window where a nun in soft wool passes you a small cloth bundle. Inside are thin spiced wafers warm from the hearth. You take a cautious bite. Clove cinnamon and something like orange peel. It melts on your tongue, leaving behind a trail of sweetness and maybe a little mischief. In some monasteries, sweet baked goods were technically allowed only on feast days. But technicalities are flexible things, especially when a novice has a toothache and someone accidentally made too much dough. These wafers are known in some regions as waffly ancestors to our waffles, but crispier and made with wine, honey, and crushed herbs. They were cooked in heavy iron presses, some plain, some embossed with symbols of saints or vines. Not just food then, but snack as message. Elsewhere, sweet snacks took the form of little spice cakes made from barley flour, boiled honey, and ground ginger. These were molded into shapes, fish flowers, tiny birds, and sold at fairs or gifted between friends. You could say I love you with a pastry, or I forgive you, or in some cases you drop this in chapel, I'm keeping it. The fire crackles. A second treat appears, a compressed honey and oat bar, almost like a granola square. This one was wrapped in cloth and tied with a wax seal. For Sister Agnetha's journey, the nun murmurs, which tells you one important truth: medieval people packed snacks for travel too. And not just for flavor. Many believed honey-based sweets offered protection on the road, sugar as shield. Not just calories, but comfort. Let's turn now to a town square where a baker is hawking journey cakes. Dense, round, and chewy, made from dried fruit, flour, and ale. These weren't meant to delight. They were meant to endure. But some were secretly delicious depending on who baked them. You try one with fig and anise. It's like eating spice-laced gravel, but your jaw adjusts. Eventually. And here's your quirky tidbit of the night: some monasteries coded recipes and psalms hiding sweet instructions between verses. A line about measured patience might mean to simmer honey for exactly one prayer's length. And a tongue cleansed with fire probably involved too much ginger. Now let's talk logistics. Sugar was rare, but honey was not. Beekeeping was common, especially in monastic gardens where hives were placed among herbs. The bees worked in silence. The monks watched in equal quiet. And when it was time to harvest, they did so gently, smoking the hive and whispering prayers just in case the bees were listening. The honey was thick, raw, fragrant with thyme or elderflower. It flavored not only cakes, but also candied nuts like walnuts or hazelnuts roasted and rolled in spiced syrup. You sample one now. It cracks, then melts. Better than gold. Of course, not all sweet snacks were approved. You hear whispers of sin cakes, pastries baked in secret during fasting periods, sweetened with forbidden butter or stuffed with almond paste shaped like, let's just say, not a fish. These were smuggled between dormitories, shared under beds, and sometimes traded for favors. The kind involving candle privileges or late-night library access. For your scholarly snack tonight, some food historians argue that these confections were acts of quiet rebellion. Others claim they were coping mechanisms. Still others say they were just food. The truth, likely all three. After all, a cookie is rarely just a cookie. As midnight approaches, the last treat arrives: a quiet tart. A hand pie of dried plum, crushed herbs, and almond paste baked without spices that might release a strong scent. Designed to be eaten in silence, unnoticed, with only a faint trace of sweetness left on the fingers. You take a bite. It's soft, subtle. The crust crumbles like a secret, and you understand something very old and very human. Snacking is a form of resistance. Some snacks are made to be shared, others to be savored, but a special few, they're made to be hidden. Tonight's story begins in a dry storage room beneath a quiet abbey. Dusty beams, old baskets, a stack of bricks pretending to be a wall, and tucked between two crates of lentils, a narrow wooden box wrapped in wool and sealed with wax. You reach for it. It smells like spice and secrets. You open the lid. Inside, a honey cake wrapped in parchment and pressed flat, almost like a slab of edible parchment itself. You break off a piece. It's dense, fragrant, studded with what might be fennel seed, or just very brave bugs. You chew anyway. Congratulations. You've just discovered one of the Middle Ages' most resilient snacks-coated cakes. In a time before mass production or barcodes, recipes weren't simply memorized, they were concealed. And not because people were trying to keep a bakery's edge. No, they were hiding from something a bit trickier: laws, customs, or even fellow monks. You see, during certain periods of the liturgical calendar, sugar and sweet spices were heavily restricted, either taxed, rationed, or outright forbidden. But that didn't stop cooks. It just made them clever. This particular cake, it's called a travel slab, found in the pages of a 14th century kitchen ledger, written mostly in Latin and partially in metaphor. The ingredients are simple ground oats, honey vinegar, and a bit of dried pear. But what makes it special is how it was used. These cakes were coded messages. One baker might press a symbol into the crust using a carved spoon: 3 dots for safe road, a cross for this cake passed inspection, or a spiral for eat before prayer, not after. In some towns, bakers had their own family systems. Entire instructions were baked into crust designs like cookie-based cryptography. Elsewhere in bustling cities, these travel cakes were often given to merchants before long journeys. They were durable, light, and full of energy, sugar, and grain compacted like a medieval power bar. You hold the remaining piece up to the lantern light. Is that a carved arrow, a bird, or just a crack? You'll never know, which is exactly how the baker wanted it. And here's your oddity of the evening. Some cakes were intentionally baked with flaws: small cracks, broken corners, uneven edges meant to symbolize humility or remind the traveler not to be vain. A misshaped cake could be considered lucky, especially if shared. Perfection suspicious. Broken holy. Now let's wander outside. The town fair is in full swing, and among the noise and music, you spot a booth selling inkless recipes. That is, cakes baked using oral tradition, passed down from grandmother to apprentice without ever being written. The vendor hands you a square of pressed fig and almond paste folded inside a barley crust. Taste it, she says. Guess the spices. You chew: clove, sage, maybe coriander. You nod. She grins. You're halfway to being family. Because in many households, recipes weren't shared freely. They were earned through time, trust, or trade. A good cake might be a dowry, a better one a confession. You visit a nearby cottage where a boy is stirring cinder syrup, a dark reduction of burnt honey, and fruit peel stirred over low flame for hours until thick and sticky. It's poured over oat biscuits and left to harden into travel tiles, meant to be licked slowly during long rides or softened in broth when teeth failed. You try one now. It sticks to your molars and your memories. But not all hidden snacks were so poetic. Some were disguised to evade tithes. One ledger from the 1300s details a village that baked sponge loaves full of air and spice presented as tax offerings, light in weight, heavy in scent, easily passed off as valuable. Elsewhere, cakes were stuffed with coins or notes sent across borders under the noses of inspectors. Snack or smuggling tool, often both. Academic note: some scholars argue these encoded and hidden sweets were culinary folklore myths grown from a few clever tales. Others point to surviving artifacts, crumbs trapped in books, notes written on reused parchment smeared with molasses. The evidence is sticky. The debate continues. The sun has set now, and someone hands you a final piece, a night slice, eaten before travel or prayer. It's thin, spiced with ginger, sweetened with fermented honey. In the center is a hollow. For your breath, the baker says. You place it on your tongue and breathe in. It's oddly calming. And as you walk back toward the Abbey cake in hand, you realize snacks aren't always about hunger. Sometimes they're messages we eat slowly. Sometimes they're promises that crumble. Sometimes they're stories in sugar and spice waiting to be decoded. Tonight's begins at a border post where the guards are yawning, the horses are stamping, and a traveler stands with a pack that smells faintly of cumin and dried apples. You watch as he's waved through, no questions asked, while a second traveler is stopped, searched, and asked to explain why his writing parchment smells like cloves. Because in this part of the medieval world, food wasn't just fuel, it was information. Tonight we explore the strange and wonderful realm of snacks used for secrets. You follow the first traveler into a quiet forest path. He walks quickly, then pauses behind an old oak tree and unlaces his boot. Inside, not parchment, not money, but a rolled fig cake, dense and dark, wrapped in wax cloth. He peels it open, revealing a series of small indentations on its surface. 3 dots, a line, 2 shallow cuts. It's not decoration, it's a code. The fig cake is part of a system used by certain trading guilds' snack-based communication. Cakes were marked spiced or shaped in distinct ways to carry messages over long distances without raising suspicion. You couldn't write a letter. Too risky. But a snack, a cake passed off as a gift or payment that could travel. One bite, one glance, and an experienced merchant might know who owed whom. What route was unsafe? Whether it was time to flee or strike a deal. You're handed a piece. It tastes like dates, fennel, and quiet urgency. Let's step into a side street tavern now where a baker's taking fresh loaves out of a clay oven. He slices one open, nothing odd. But when he hands it to the merchant beside him, it's turned upside down. The merchant nods and leaves. You blink. Welcome to the world of signal loaves. These were ordinary-looking breads with extraordinary uses. A small twist in the crust might mean yes. A thumbprint, no. A notch along the edge could point to a location, a person, or an agreed-upon hour. Bread is a language spoken in crust, and it didn't stop there. In times of unrest, food dye was used to signal allegiance. A slightly green-tinged pastry might mean support for one faction, a rose-colored one for another. All of it baked, disguised, and consumed before the wrong people asked too many questions. Here's your strange but true detail of the night some monasteries used salted almonds as voting tokens, soaked in herb-infused brine to differentiate decisions. A bitter almond abstain, a sweet one, support, tossed into a bowl and tallied after prayer. Democracy by snack. In a quieter village, a woman is arranging prayer biscuits into a cloth pouch. These are rounds stamped with crosses and lines meant to mark stages of a pilgrimage. 1 biscuit per prayer, 1 per day. Each stamped differently so a priest could verify the journey's progress, assuming the pilgrim hadn't eaten the evidence too early. And then, of course, there's the forbidden fruitcake. Not a metaphor. An actual fruitcake rich with imported raisins, candied peel and nuts, illegal in some cities during periods of wartime or famine. But that just made it more valuable, so people hid them. Some buried the cakes and marked the spot with rocks. Others disguised them as bricks. One record from 1372 describes a baker who flattened cakes into thin planks and used them to line the inside of a traveling chest. Snacks as smuggling tools hidden behind linen shirts and good intentions. Academic spice for the evening. Some historians doubt these stories, calling them legend. Others point to preserved examples. Cakes recovered from castle walls with notches and symbols baked deep into the crust. Whether fact or folktale, the idea remains in a world of danger. Food could be truth, warning, and whisper. You return to the forest path now, where the traveler has built a small fire. He unwraps a square of pastry filled with herbs and dried onion. You take a bite. It's savory, soft, and oddly familiar. This one means safe crossing, he says. You glance toward the river. A boat waits. No signal, no call, just a nod and a full stomach. Tonight doesn't begin in a market, a castle, or a monastery. It begins in a storm cellar. You're deep underground, seated beside barrels of grain and jars of pickled turnips, while outside rain lashes the earth with medieval drama. The air smells of dust and cloves. A child lights a small lamp. Someone passes you a tin box. Inside, a curious stack of round layered wafers, thin as parchment, fragrant with spices and strangely warm. These are war biscuits, someone whispers. Tonight you enter the world of crisis snacks, foods, born not from celebration or invention, but from necessity. Yet even here, medieval cooks found ways to sneak in a surprise comfort, and sometimes even beauty. You break the wafer. It's crisp, but the center is chewy. A hint of nutmeg, a flicker of honey. You chew slowly, tasting the story. Let's step back. In times of siege, famine, or winter isolation, survival meant more than gruel and barley soup. It meant careful planning and clever cooking. People stored not just salted meat and pickled cabbage, but long-keeping sweets and sturdy snacks designed to lift morale when the sky looked gray for the 6th week straight. One of the most famous, the siege biscuit, a dense slab of flour, dried fruit and honey baked until it could survive a car crash or a flood. These were stored in cellars wrapped in oilcloth and eaten only when truly needed. Chewing one was an act of commitment. You nibble a corner now. It's dusty, but sweet, like memory. Other versions included parchment pies, thin layers of sweetened dough wrapped around preserved fruit, or crushed nuts then sealed with wax. They were light portable and designed to be boiled or baked over embers during lean days. Soldiers carried them. So did midwives. And then there were comfort crumbs, a nickname given to a type of oat and honey biscuit, often hidden at the bottom of a family's salt jar. Only pulled out when the youngest child cried through the night or when someone returned from a long absence. They weren't fancy, but they were reassuring. Your odd historical tidbit tonight: in some towns, households made storm cakes each autumn. Barley flour vinegar, dried herbs, and just enough sugar to remind you life was still sweet. The cakes were stored in linen, placed in clay pots, and opened only during the worst weather. They were as much tradition as food. You can almost hear the rain in the flavor. Let's visit a cabin next. Snow falls outside. Inside, a woman stirs a pot of grain glue, a thick mash of millet-dried peas and apple peel. Once cooled, it's cut into cubes and roasted near the hearth. It's chewy filling and smells like survival. Later, in a crumbling farmhouse, someone unearths a crisis, tart a dried pastry crust filled with mashed beans and cinnamon left to age until the flavor sharpens. Not pretty, but oddly delicious. A recipe passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, never written, only shown, always whispered. And let's not forget the monk's fallback: small balls of ground nuts, dried fruit, and stale bread, pressed together with wild honey and rolled in oat flour, carried on pilgrimages, shared during bad harvests, left quietly on neighbors' doorsteps when pride was too strong to ask for help. Here's your academic bite for the evening. Some scholars argue these snacks weren't just food, but ritual objects used to mark hard times and foster resilience. Others say they were simply resourceful leftovers, but maybe they were both culinary talismans against hunger and despair. You reach for one last item in the tin: a square of spiced leather apple mash vinegar and cloves dried into chewy sheets. It's tangy, warming, and oddly nostalgic, like biting into someone else's story. And as the storm softens above, you realize snacks made in crisis carry a different kind of memory. Not of feasts or festivals, but of endurance, of creativity in darkness, of hands that kept baking even when everything else was crumbling. Let's begin this one in silence. The kind of silence that lives inside stone walls, beneath wooden beams, beside a narrow window glowing faintly with moonlight. You're in a cloister, and the hours after supper, when words are scarce, but hunger, subtle, polite, still lingers. Tonight we explore the fast day snacks of the medieval monastic world. Gentle, humble, quiet foods meant not to delight, but to pass unnoticed. You sit on a low bench. A monk in brown robes walks past carrying a wooden tray. He places it in front of you without speaking. On it, 3 modest items: a flat round almond cheese, a curl of dark fruit leather, and a piece of pea bread, nearly gray, steamed instead of baked. You begin with the almond cheese. It's soft, grainy, and cool, made not from milk, of course, but from ground almonds, soaked in warm water, pressed and flavored with a trace of vinegar and rose. It melts like memory, not cream. Almond milk was the workhorse of the monastic kitchen, used to replace dairy during fast Lent and dozens of lesser abstinence days throughout the calendar. Cheese, custard, sauces, even mock butter all came from this humble nut. Next, the fruit leather. It's made of plum paste spiced with clove, then dried on a cloth and rolled like parchment. You tear a corner off. It's tart, chewy, and strangely meditative. In some abbeys, this was the only sweet allowed for weeks. And the pea bread, a blend of dried pea flour, rye, and a hint of sage steamed over hot stones. It has the texture of dense sponge. You chew slowly. The taste isn't loud. It's not supposed to be. Now you're beginning to understand the quiet logic of these snacks. They were calming, nearly invisible, designed to soothe the body without inflaming the mind or the stomach. After all, too much pleasure might disturb your thoughts. Too much flavor might wake up your ego. Let's walk to the kitchen. The monk at the hearth is stirring something pale in a copper pot. He ladles a portion into a wooden bowl. You take a sip. It's a kind of barley almond porridge, warm and thick. Night broth, he says, for those who pray until dawn. In many monastic communities, late-night prayer was common, especially during Lent or Advent. And though formal meals were forbidden, a spoonful of something soft, a quiet snack, was sometimes permitted for strength. No one would say it aloud, but the bowl would appear. Here's your curious fact of the evening. Some monasteries served mock meatballs during fasts made from minced almonds, breadcrumbs, and wine-soaked mushrooms, spiced and shaped carefully to resemble meat, but clearly not meat. It was a culinary tightrope, feeding the body while denying it, playing with mimicry while maintaining purity. Now let's return to the cloister hallway where a novice monk unwraps a cloth bundle. Inside, a thin square of fig cake gifted from a visiting abbey. It's dry, spiced with anise, and almost bitter, but it's precious. During fasting seasons, gift snacks became currency, not just for joy, but for connection. Monasteries sent each other preserved sweets, salted nuts, and even folded leaves of pressed fruit as a gesture of care and mild culinary competition. You eat a slice of parsley wafer, next pressed between two warm stones until crisp. It's green, faintly sweet, and surprisingly good. It makes you wonder what else they weren't talking about. Here's your scholarly puzzle. Some historians believe these snacks were meant to trick the body, offering the sensation of fullness without actual richness. Others argue they were acts of mercy, gentle indulgences, given structure by rules. And then there's the third view, that these quiet foods were prayers in edible form, measured humble, and meant to vanish without fuss. The last snack of the evening arrives in a bowl stewed lettuce and mint, served cold with vinegar and almond oil. You hesitate, then try it. It tastes like surrender. And maybe that's the point. To remind you that even in silence, even in sacrifice, there is space for flavor, for care, and for the small kindness of something warm in the hand just when you need it most. Tonight, let's begin with a whisper right at the edge of the cloister garden where the wind rustles mint and marjoram and the bees have finally stopped working. You're seated beneath an old stone arch, watching a monk pull a basket from the shade. It smells faintly of almonds and steam. Inside are three odd-looking snacks, a pale wheel of cheese, a folded sheet of yellow egg, and something that looks suspiciously like fish but isn't. Tonight we explore the delightful world of medieval imitation foods, the clever, playful dishes designed not just to nourish during fasts, but to entertain, confuse, and occasionally baffle visiting bishops. You begin with the wheel of cheese. It looks like goat's cheese, white soft, slightly cracked at the edges. But as you spread it onto bread, the smell gives it away. It's almond cheese again, but this one has been smoked with applewood and pressed into a mold designed to mimic rind. Someone even carved cracks to make it look aged. You chew. It's nutty, savory, and far too convincing. Then the egg. It's cold, wrapped in cabbage leaf. Inside, a yolk-colored ball made from mashed peas, saffron, and vinegar, resting on a white of almond milk jelly. A soft bite reveals layers, textures, even a faint crumble like overcooked yolk. And though no hen was involved, you can't help but whisper, "That's actually quite good." Now for the boldest deception, the fish. It glistens. It even smells a little briny, but it's made from pulsed lentils shaped by hand, layered with herb paste and blackened along the edges to imitate grilled skin. Under the tongue, it breaks apart just like soft trout. You laugh quietly. Somewhere in this abbey, a cook has too much time and too much talent, because these weren't just solutions, they were culinary illusions. Medieval cooks, especially in monasteries, turned fast day rules into creative challenges. No meat. Fine. Let's carve mushrooms to look like sausages. No butter. Let's whip almond oil into snow. No eggs. Let's make one layer by layer with legumes and color. And the best part, they weren't always eaten. Sometimes these creations were made purely for feasts of the eye, brought to table, admired, and returned to the kitchen for the next day's spectacle. Here's your curious historical nibble. Some cooks developed pearless pears, pastries shaped and painted to look like real fruit, even bruised on one side for realism. Cut them open and you'd find meatless stuffing, sweetened squash, or herb lentil paste. Trickery, yes, but polite trickery. Let's move to a convent kitchen next. The The cook here is shaping marzipan birds, pressing almond paste into tiny molds, painting them with beetroot and saffron water. They'll be arranged on a plate to mimic a flock, each one filled with spiced pea mash instead of nut cream. Guests will bite paws and blink. Birds, one will ask. The nuns will smile, no. And then there's the illusion banquet, a tradition in some wealthy monastic orders or noble courts. One recorded menu includes fish made of fruit ham, made from figs, and eggs made entirely of sugar and air. It was an edible joke, an artistic expression, and a loophole rolled into one. Academic spice for the night, some scholars argue this imitation cuisine reflects a medieval wrestling match between desire and restraint to mimic the forbidden but stop short of sin. Others see it as pure performance, a food-based theater where the rules were as important as the flavors. You're handed one last creation, a mushroom tart made to resemble meat pie. The crust is golden, the filling thick, but it's all mushroom, lentil, and barley slow-cooked with red wine. You take a bite. It tastes familiar, comforting, maybe even better than the original. You lean back beneath the arched belly warm and realize something very old and very true to imitate well is a kind of love for the craft, for the rules, and for the people who need to eat within them. Let's not begin in a monastery or a castle or a kitchen tonight. Let's begin in a hiding place, a hollow behind a hearthstone, a locked coffer beneath a floorboard, a flap sewn into the lining of a traveling cloak. In each, a single thing, a snack. Because not all food in the Middle Ages was meant to be seen. Some was forbidden secret or just a little too precious to share. Tonight, you and I are unraveling the story of forbidden medieval sweet snack sweets, so coveted, so guarded, or so against the rules that they had to be hidden away. Not in shame, but in strategy. The first is handed to you discreetly. It's small, crisp, dusted with something that might be flour or finely ground almonds. You take a cautious bite. It melts like snow on the tongue. Beneath that honey rose water, a pinch of crushed coriander. It tastes like something you shouldn't have. This is a monastic kiss, a cookie baked in secret by a scribe during Lent. The ingredients were fine, but the timing was all wrong. So it was shared in whispers after the abbot had gone to bed, and only between those who understood that a little joy wasn't a sin. Then there's the travel cake. Imagine this: a merchant on the road, dusty and weary, unwraps a cloth from his pack. Inside, a flat square of dried fig and almond paste layered between barley wafers. It's meant to last for weeks, but he eats it in 2 bites. Why? Because in some regions, sugar and dried fruit were taxed like treasure. Only the wealthy were supposed to travel with such things, but merchants learned how to hide sweetness inside bland wrappings, snacks disguised as bandages tucked into candle molds or rolled into socks. Crunchy socks, but still. Here's your strange detail of the night: some sweets were baked with hollow centers, used to smuggle not messages, but spices. Cardamom, saffron, even powdered ginger. You'd break off a piece, chew thoughtfully, and feel a different warmth roll across your tongue. A heat that wasn't just culinary, it was economic. You walk into a small cottage now. A woman is stirring plum butter into a clay pot. She's not writing anything down. In fact, the recipe she's using was never written. It's spoken only on feast days and only in the kitchen, never beyond the family. Because in many places, the recipe was the power. To write it down was to risk someone else claiming it. So sweets became oral legacies, whispered like spells, tasted like secrets. Next, we visit a tiny chapel kitchen. A novice baker opens a cupboard hidden behind a tapestry. Inside, a scroll of thin pastry wrapped around candied peel, sweetened breadcrumbs, and crushed almond. "This is the one we don't mention," he whispers. "It's meant for the bishop's table, but sometimes..." He trails off. You nod. You take a bite. And then there are the coded sweets. Recipes written in strange meters with ingredients hidden behind metaphors. 3 mornings of gold, pressed by the hand of the East, wrapped in linen's lull, which scholars believe meant honey, saffron, and flour dusted through muslin. These poetic recipes were common among women's communities, nuns, widows, healers, where food was both nourishment and art. A cookie might be an herbal tonic. A tart might be a medicinal charm, and to write it plainly, that would ruin the magic. You're handed one last treat, a compressed sugar drop speckled with black seeds. It melts slowly. Anise, honey, maybe something floral. You close your eyes. It's not dramatic, but it's comforting, clever, and just secretive enough to make you smile. Let's not start in a kitchen or cloister tonight. Let's start in a hallway dimly lit, candle wax dripping, and silence so thick you could slice it with a butter knife. If you had butter. You don't. You're standing outside a door. On the other side, you hear quiet giggling, the rustle of parchment, and the faint clink of ceramic. A young scribe opens it, just a crack eyes darting. "Are you here for the cakes?" she whispers. You nod. Because tonight's story is about hidden confections and coated cake sweets, not only kept secret, but used as tools of communication, cultural survival, and sometimes gentle rebellion. You step inside. The room smells of clove, honey, and ink. On the table are small round biscuits with strange symbols pressed into the top spirals, crosses, animals, and what looks like a fish riding a horse. You blink. Someone hands you one. Don't eat the fish, they say. That one's for the priest. These are coated cakes, a kind of edible shorthand used in certain regions to mark feast days, share knowledge, or quietly express identity. In Jewish, Muslim, and Christian communities across medieval Europe and the Mediterranean, cookies were sometimes decorated with patterns that signaled holidays, morning birth, or resistance, depending on who saw them. Take a bite. The sugar cracks. The inside is soft, flavored with cardamom, lemon peel, and finely crushed walnut. Delicious, yes, but it also tells a story if you know how to read the crust. Let's walk down the hall to a different room, this one quieter. Inside, a woman is wrapping small honey cakes in linen, each one marked with a faint ink dot. 1 dot safe, 2 warning, 3 urgent. These aren't just snacks. They're messengers delivered between households or across cities when written letters were too risky. This tradition likely comes from older trade routes where food was often the only thing allowed past checkpoints. If the bread or cake looked ordinary, no one would stop it. But if it carried a code pressed into the dough or a scent blended in a pattern, the recipient would know exactly what to do. Your quirky bite for the night. In some regions of northern Africa and southern Spain, pastry braids were used to indicate emotional messages, 3 twists for longing, 5 for joy, and 1 long pull for grief. And yes, these were delivered by hand, often with no words spoken. You're handed another item now, a triangular tart filled with poppy seed and fig. It looks innocent, but inside is a carefully folded scrap of cloth, embroidered, not written, with a stitch pattern only a certain group of women would recognize. This is recipe as resistance, a way to remember even when books burned and tongues were tied. Let's pause in a hidden garden. A novice gardener pulls a plum from her sleeve. She slices it. Inside is a hollowed center stuffed with dried mint and honey paste. This one's for calming nerves, she says, but it's also our recipe for the wedding feast. Just don't tell the abbess. Because oral traditions didn't just survive in stories, they survived in flavor. Recipes were hidden in song, dance, embroidery, and tonight's specialty in sweets. No ink, no trail, just memory made edible. Here's your academic whisper. Some food historians argue that medieval coded recipes were exaggerated folklore, but growing evidence, especially from private letters and recipe books, suggests they were real, particularly in communities facing persecution or displacement. The kitchen, it turns out, was often the safest archive. You sit down finally and unwrap one last gift, a spiced ginger cookie with a small cross hatch on the bottom. It means safe journey. The baker made it for her son heading out on pilgrimage. He'll eat it before the first mile, but the message will carry him all the way. You take a bite. The crunch is quiet, the meaning stays. Let's begin this final part in the smokehouse of a ruined village. You're crouched beside an old hearth ash, long settled bricks, cracked with age. But beneath the rubble, tucked behind scorched wood and forgotten tools, is a basket. Inside, crumbs of something once precious. Tonight, you and I are tasting the final chapter of this journey crisis. Snacks, the humble, resilient foods crafted not for joy or flavor, but for survival. Not survival of the body alone, but of memory, of dignity, of taste in the face of collapse. The first thing you try is hard as stone. It looks like bark, smells faintly of vinegar and fennel. It's a famine biscuit made from ground acorns, boiled dandelion greens, and barley hulls. Not pleasant, but edible. In the right light, it might almost be noble. And noble is the word. Because famine food wasn't always desperate or random. Even in the worst of times, people chose carefully. What to save, what to combine, what to flavor, just enough to pretend, if only for one bite, that life still had sweetness in it. You walk to a small hut now. Inside, a woman crumbles dried fruit peel into a pot of boiled water. She stirs in powdered almonds stolen from a wedding feast 3 seasons ago and adds a sprig of rosemary. This becomes faux broth, a rich-smelling, nearly empty liquid meant to comfort children through long winter nights. Here's a curious taste stone jam. A thick blend of mashed rose hips and gravel-washed roots boiled until sticky. It's stored in old boots cooled on a slate and scooped with shells. The flavor, sour, fibrous, vaguely medicinal, but better than nothing. Sometimes better than silence. And here's your odd fact of the night. Some siege kitchens made bread bricks, edible construction blocks of flour salt, crushed seeds and lime-soaked grains, pressed into trays, dried and stacked for both eating and defense. Architecture you could chew. You pause to taste a slice of chalk cheese, not real cheese, of course, but a blend of steamed root mash and ash-dusted salt shaped into a wheel and aged in straw. It's soft, bland, strangely comforting, like chewing on memory. Because even when hope was thin, people still cooked with care. They sang as they stirred. They taught children which weeds wouldn't kill them. They made recipes out of nothing and rituals out of whatever was left. You move to another house, this one half-standing, half-shadow. A boy hides under a bench. He pulls out a bundle wrapped in bark. Inside puff chickpea wafers. His mother makes them from soaked fermented legumes, flattened and dried in the sun. They last for months, taste like dust and lemon. You eat one, it cracks like survival. Here's your academic whisper. Crisis snacks offer archaeological windows into food insecurity, yes, but they also show a quiet resistance, a refusal to let flavor vanish completely. Even if it meant grinding insects into paste, even if it meant sneaking herbs into porridge when no one was looking. You drink from a hollow gourd. Inside is fermented grain tea, fizzy with nettle and yeast. The taste is wild, metallic, herbal, strange, but it keeps you warm. It tells you that you're still here. The last thing you eat tonight isn't even really food. It's a scrap of flatbread singed at the edge, painted with honey, and folded with a tiny slip of cloth inside. The cloth says nothing, but it smells of lavender and smoke, and that is message enough. Because this is how flavor survives in hard times, not with sweetness, but with memory, with people still baking, still sharing, still choosing taste even when taste doesn't come easy. And now for the final crumbs of comedy from the edge of hunger. One noble family tried to stretch a single dried plum into 6 tarts by calling it essence of orchard. A monk once declared that eating boiled leather wasn't a sin if you believe hard enough. And in one forgotten town, someone passed off toasted bark as spiced wafer and won a prize for innovation. You laugh, you chew, you remember. And so we end not with a feast, but with a flicker of fire, of flavor, of the fragile, stubborn joy of eating, even when everything else is falling apart.